Today we are attempting something ambitious. We're trying to reverse engineer the blueprints for a successful creative project in modern media.
Yeah, the kind of project that manages to be wildly profitable, culturally enduring, and maybe most importantly, just flat out enjoyable to watch.
And if you're looking for one person who really embodies that balance in Hollywood right now, you inevitably land on the director and producer whose work you've asked us to explore,
Yeah.
Shawn Levy.
Absolutely. I mean, Levy is the common thread in so many of the biggest, most high-stakes projects of the last decade.
For sure. He's the director and producer behind the absolute phenomenon of Stranger Things.
And the director of films like Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds, Lil Rel Howery, and Taika Waititi. And now he's steering that massive Marvel ship with the upcoming Deadpool and Wolverine.
You know, Levy's name has become a shortcut for a certain kind of quality. We call it enjoyable cinema. His style is, it's light, it's accessible, and it's just reliably entertaining.
But because he works so successfully in these huge commercial movies, he sometimes gets underestimated as a storyteller, doesn't he?
Oh, completely. Which is, frankly, a massive strategic and critical miscalculation.
That's the core idea we really need to unpack. The sources you shared confirm that Levy has this incredible understanding of how to craft a movie that's entertaining, but at the same time, tells a genuinely compelling story.
Right. He balances that meaningful substance with mass commercial appeal.
So the question is how? How does he do that, especially when you have a project like Deadpool and Wolverine, which has to navigate the fan expectations for two of the biggest comic book characters ever?
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to use Levy's career's launchpad to really pull apart the mechanics of a modern franchise.
Okay, so where are we starting?
We're starting with a massive, high-risk streaming hit Stranger Things. Then we'll move into the cold, hard data of film profitability with researchers like Stephen Follows.
And then the big one.
And then the ultimate case study in franchise expansion and, what they call transmedia mastery. Star Wars. We're looking for the nuts and bolts. What turns a good idea into an enduring multi-platform ecosystem?
Okay, let's start with what is, you could argue, Levy's most culturally impactful success, Stranger Things. It's a Netflix tentpole now, a global phenomenon, but according to Levy himself, its entire existence was a huge swing, a staggering bet for Netflix when it first debuted back in 2016.
And that context, the 2016 of it all, is so critical here.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget how uncertain the streaming world was then.
Right.
Netflix was not the global pop culture behemoth it is now. I mean, it was still trying to establish itself against prestige cable channels like HBO and AMC.
It certainly wasn't the first place you'd think to go to launch a massive, high-budget genre series.
Not at all. It was not the de facto first choice for creators.
And the scale that the Duffer Brothers wanted was just inherently expensive and ambitious. They always saw it as an 8-hour movie, not a TV show.
Exactly. And to pull off that kind of cinematic storytelling, that sweeping Spielbergian sci-fi vibe,
Right.
it needed production values that were, almost unheard of for episodic television at the time.
It really did.
So the risk wasn't just in the retro 80s aesthetic or the relatively unknown cast. The real risk was the financial scale.
You're asking a platform that's still kind of finding its feet.
To sink a massive amount of money into a project that, on paper, made not a lot of immediate sense. You're mixing Cold War spy thrillers with Stephen King-style horror and classic 80s teen drama.
It's a huge tonal tightrope walk. It
Yeah.
could have so easily just fallen apart.
So easily.
But the platform itself, the streaming model, that turned out to be the key, right? That's what unlocked its potential.
Exactly. Levy calls it the streaming binge model. And for a story designed as an 8-hour movie, that way of watching it just always made the most sense.
The audience didn't have to wait a week for the next piece of the puzzle.
No, they could consume the entire cinematic story arc immediately.
Yeah.
That format was the perfect delivery mechanism for what the Duffer Brothers were creating. It turned that massive risk into a runaway global success.
And it basically transformed Netflix's brand identity almost overnight.
It really did.
So if the first season was a huge bet, the 5th season is now an expectation measured in billions of dollars. The sources we looked at mention the expectations for the upcoming Volume 1 of Season 5 are just astronomical.
Well, the production costs are so high that if you treated the season like a single feature film, it would genuinely be one of the most expensive movies ever made.
Wow.
And that's the payoff for taking that initial risk, right? That enormous budget is the cost of maintaining a decade of pop culture relevance.
And this is where Levy's role as both director and producer becomes so interesting. His job isn't just creative.
No, it's managerial. He's the guy who has to make sure that this massive, expensive ship maintains its core creative vision while navigating all the complex logistics and financial expectations of delivering Netflix's, its crown jewel.
So his skill set isn't just about directing actors or setting up a cool shot. It's about managing scale and, like you said before, that fusion of different genres.
It is. Levy is excellent at managing tone. I mean, think about Free Guy. He handles Ryan Reynolds' very specific brand of meta-humor.
Right, the fourth wall breaking.
Without letting the movie just dissolve into cynicism. He brings a real heart and sincerity to the spectacle.
And you see that in Stranger Things, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
His contribution is maintaining that vital emotional core, the friendships, the family dynamics, amidst all the escalating supernatural horror.
That's what keeps you invested.
That ability to ground the spectacle in genuine emotion is why his films stay enjoyable instead of just being loud. He makes the audience actually care about the stakes, and that right there is the secret sauce for any enduring IP.
Okay, so that's successful high-risk world of Stranger Things. That's kind of an outlier.
A huge outlier.
So now we move to the more brutal, data-driven reality of the wider film industry. And for this, we're relying on the work of data researcher Stephen Follows.
Right.
If Shawn Levy found gold by taking a massive creative bet, what happens to the thousands of other productions that are not Stranger Things?
Well, Follows' summary of the film industry is deeply cynical, but it's also pretty accurate. He has this famous comparison. He says the business is like the wily coyote running off the cliff.
Oh, I love that.
It just keeps going, powered purely by momentum and belief, even though the underlying financial model is, fundamentally unsustainable.
Okay, what makes it unsustainable? I mean, movies make billions of dollars. How is the business model flawed?
It's because of the ratio of failure to success.
Yeah.
Most films lose money.
Really? Most of them?
A catastrophic amount, often. You have two giant variables, the production cost and then the P&A cost, print and advertising.
And the P&A can be huge.
It can easily equal or even exceed the production cost. And those costs are often really difficult to get back globally. The entire industry survives by chasing a few massive outliers, like Star Wars or Levy's projects, which have to subsidize the vast majority of flops.
So it's a portfolio built on hope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
90% of the investments fail, but the 10% that hit, they hit big enough to keep the whole coyote running in midair.
And this is where we get to that fascinating anomaly that really sticks with you from the research, the horror anomaly.
Yes.
This is the core insight that horror is the only genre where profitability is. It's kind of irrelevant to quality.
Precisely. In almost every other genre, drama, action, comedy, critical reviews, and what the audience thinks, it all correlates pretty heavily with box office success.
If critics hate your prestige drama, nobody's going to go see it.
Right. But in horror, the quality just doesn't seem to matter as much. A bad horror movie can still make significant money. Think of all those films that critics absolutely hate, but they still pull in these massive opening weekends. They perform commercially, even with middling audience scores.
So what does that tell us about the horror audience? If they aren't going for, prestige or quality, what's motivating them?
They're motivated by the experience itself. It's a social event, a cheap form of entertainment, maybe a convenient scare.
Okay.
The audience for horror cares the least about the film's budget or its critical quality compared to any other genre. They aren't expecting a masterpiece.
They're just looking for the jump scare.
The jump scares, the genre mechanics, and that communal experience of being scared together in a dark room. Their intentions are just easier to monetize.
And this all feeds into horror's very unique and very lean financial structure.
It does. Horror operates on extremely low margins when it comes to ancillary revenue. It has some of the lowest marketing rates, low merchandising rates. It makes almost nothing from airlines or soundtrack sales compared to a blockbuster.
So where does the profit come from?
It relies almost entirely on that concentrated initial rush, the opening weekend, or quick VOD sales, and crucially, its franchisability.
Ah, the sequels.
Horror is built to be replicated cheaply. Sequels 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Which makes horror the wild, wild west for independent filmmakers.
It's the entry point. It's seen as way more open than other genres because the budget isn't the main factor for success. You can focus on creative execution and mood, not big stars or massive CGI.
Even the greats started there.
Even major figures like Steven Spielberg. I mean, he started here with the seminal, budget-conscious horror of Jaws. Horror gives you the proof of concept that you can connect directly with an audience that's hungry for the experience, even with limited resources.
Okay, so moving beyond the lean model of horror, That concept of ancillary revenue, which you said is minimal for horror, is absolutely critical for the giant blockbusters.
It's everything.
And that's where we see the transition to Star Wars.
Exactly. We move from the financially efficient small ecosystem to the maximalist ecosystem. Star Wars is ground zero for the modern merchandising genre.
The movie is the ad.
The core strategy, and this is something George Lucas had to fight for initially, is using the movie itself as a massive 2-hour commercial to sell other product lines and generate maximum revenue streams. It's a strategy focused on maximizing the value of the IP and reducing the pressure on just the box office.
And every studio now builds their releases around that model.
Every single one.
But that ability to spin off other products isn't just limited to massive IP, though. We see ancillary revenue saving even low-budget indie films. You referenced the Oscar-nominated Irish independent film Once.
Yeah. What a beautiful, small, intimate musical. It was released about 15 years ago. It was a huge critical hit, but, because of its scale, its box office was limited.
But the success didn't stop there.
Not at all. Its success was just the beginning. It led to a successful Broadway show and multiple highly profitable soundtrack releases. I am absolutely confident that the money they made just from the song sales and licenses alone was more than the film's box office take.
So franchisability doesn't have to mean space wizards.
No. It just requires a powerful, central creative asset. In this case, the music that can be repurposed across other highly profitable platforms.
This brings us to the final, necessary, but often ignored piece of the puzzle, marketing. If a filmmaker just focuses on the art and their ego, they're fighting that Wile E. Coyote uphill battle.
Oh, they're doomed. The biggest disconnect for so many projects is the failure to even think about selling the product. A director is thinking about their vision, the audience is thinking about what to watch on Friday night.
You need someone who can bridge that gap.
You need professional trailer editors, for example, who know exactly how to sell your kind of movie. Follows points out that these editors, they don't care about your vision. Their job is to move the product and create demand.
Because if you fail to market it, even a great movie is just an expensive secret.
You have to generate that initial rush, that demand for day one, because that's what catches the eye of the general audience and, keeps the coyote running.
So the transition here is pretty clear. Whether you're making a cheap, profitable horror movie or a Shawn Levy-level blockbuster, success relies on ruthless efficiency in how you distribute and monetize it.
Which, naturally, brings us to the gold standard of hyper-efficient IP, Star Wars.
Okay, so Star Wars. It's the ultimate case study in this kind of multi-platform storytelling because it didn't just capitalize on what we call transmedia.
It basically pioneered the modern approach. It started expanding its narrative across comics, novelizations, arcade games, action figures, right from the very start in 1977.
And while that phenomenal financial success guaranteed its cultural impact, it also created a bit of a perception problem, didn't it? Especially among older sci-fi purists.
Oh, yeah. The sheer ubiquity and the commercial success of all those transmedia spin-offs made the story world seem more childish, more frivolous, and more obviously commercial than, say, 2001, A Space Odyssey, or Blade Runner.
It was too fun.
It was too fun, too accessible, and too clearly designed to sell toys. But for millions of young fans, that ubiquity was the gateway drug to a whole universe of fantastic fiction. It proved that accessibility and profitability are often two sides of the same coin.
And because of that scale, it was never just about the films. Just liking Star Wars wasn't really enough for fan street cred, was it? The other properties meant there were many different Star Warses.
And that complexity is why the transmedia ecosystem is so fascinating to study. You could be a fan solely of the Timothy Zahn novels.
Or the Knights of the Old Republic video games.
Or the comics. Your specific experience of this massive hit would be shaped by those specific ancillary texts, which led to different communities, different definitions of what was canon, and different fan identities.
And this vast, sprawling empire of content was, paradoxically, initially held together by one man, George Lucas. His insistence on singular authorial control is, well, it's legendary.
And that legendary control was born out of a really deep resentment toward the Hollywood studio system.
After his early films.
After his experiences with THX 1138 and American Graffiti, where he felt the studios just severely compromised his vision, he developed this profound distrust of Hollywood's authority. And that drove his unrelenting, almost obsessive commitment to securing creative and financial control over every single aspect of Star Wars.
The sources draw a really sharp, provocative parallel here, comparing Lucas's commitment to control to the central villain of his own saga.
They do. The unrelenting commitment to securing creative control is seen as paralleling the Darth Vader figure. It's a fascinating, contradictory journey.
He starts as this young, experimental filmmaker,
Valuing the communal environment of American zoetrope. He ends up as a corporate Hollywood mogul, owning Lucasfilm from 1971 all the way to 2012, and embodying the very empire he supposedly critiques in his own films.
That's a pretty intense comparison. Is the source suggesting he became a villain to his own creative vision or just a ruthless businessman protecting his creation?
I think it suggests the contradiction is just inherent to who he is as an author. He was a ruthless businessman. He had to be to protect the creation. But the paradox is that even with that singular control, his authorship is defined as transtextual.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means the singular author is simultaneously in control of the pipeline, but also subject to the dynamic life of the text as it expresses itself across the whole franchise. Once he created this vast world, the fans and the ancillary texts began to define it, pulling the story away from his singular intentions.
And that dynamic changed completely with the Disney acquisition in 2012. That initiated a new era, fundamentally shifting the whole authorial structure of the franchise.
The Disney sale was a necessary freeing of the saga. It liberated the franchise from Lucas's increasingly embattled relationship with a more diverse fan base, especially around the prequels and the critiques of his perceived white male worldview.
So the singular author gave way to the team player.
Absolutely. The new structure is centralized around Kathleen Kennedy as president and the Lucasfilm Story Group as the central development team. They strategically assign auteurs, often people with backgrounds in indie filmmaking, like J.J. Abrams, Gareth Edwards, and Rian Johnson, to direct new installments.
The control is collective and corporate now.
Not singular and visionary.
And Disney's primary view of the franchise, as we touched on earlier, is just maximizing product diversification. They see it as a very lucrative IP farm.
Oh, they explicitly said it. The scale of the universe, more than 17,000 characters, thousands of planets, 20,000 years of history, that was infinite inspiration. The goal is clear: maximize creative output while maintaining just enough narrative coherence for the sake of long-term monetization.
So the difference is that Lucas wanted creative freedom.
And Disney wants commercial synergy.
Let's drill down into the specifics of how this transmedia ecosystem actually expanded the narrative. Let's start with the novelizations, which were essential promotional tools right from the beginning.
Novelizations are just fascinating artifacts. They serve this double goal. They prolong the film experience to capitalize on box office success, and they also function as promotional material.
And because they're often based on early scripts, they can have scenes that weren't in the final movie.
Exactly. So they function as both a spoiler and an expansion of the universe.
The New Hope novelization is a perfect example of its promotional function, especially since it was published 5 months before the film even premiered.
Yes. And it was attributed to Lucas, but ghostwritten by Alan Dean Foster. Critically, it included this short prologue, presented as an excerpt from the Journal of the Whills.
I remember that.
For decades, that 362-word introduction, which hinted at the grand history, the Jedi-Sith conflict, the political background, it served as the only real insight into the events that would potentially be covered in episodes 4, 2, and 3. It created a canon gap that fans spent years filling with their imaginations.
And later novelizations actively tried to correct perceived flaws in the films, almost like a patch for the core narrative.
The best example is Matthew Stover's novelization of Revenge of the Sith in 2005. It's widely regarded by fans as essential reading because it explicitly corrects the film's pacing issues around Anakin Skywalker's turn to the dark side.
Where the film felt a bit sudden to some people.
Right, maybe unmotivated. Stover provides extensive internal viewpoints, inner monologues, and psychological underpinnings, giving a much clearer, more emotionally motivated path toward his fall.
And it also experimented with literary style, right? It was more interactive.
It's a remarkable piece of writing. The novel often switches tenses and point of view, and at certain key high-tension moments, the narrator addresses you, the reader, directly in the second person.
Using you
To put you right into the character's emotional and physical space. This immersive device makes it feel kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure book, offering a dramatically separate and enhanced experience beyond what the film could capture.
Okay, let's jump to the audio medium. The sheer volume of content added in the radio dramatization of A New Hope is just staggering.
The radio dramatization, or TRD, ran for 351 minutes. That's nearly 3 times the length of the film's dialogue, which was about 121 minutes. This massive expansion allowed them to include new characters and scenes from earlier drafts of Lucas's screenplay that never made it to the screen.
And the power of audio, that theater of the mind, makes the listener an active participant.
Absolutely. Radio forces you to actively build the world in your mind. As the critic Frank Brady argued, because the listener becomes the set designer and the casting director, the tactical warfare of the Millennium Falcon versus the Death Star can become more real, more vital than the film version.
It's a more participatory form of the story.
Highly participatory. Even if only Mark Hamill and Anthony Daniels reprise their roles.
But the TRD's most impactful contribution was probably the deep character expansion, especially for Princess Leia.
Oh, it placed Leia at the very center of the story's exploration of violence and ethics. The TRD includes multiple new scenes focusing only on Leia, and it meticulously charts her transition from a pacifist humanitarian
On Alderaan.
right, who only provides political support for the rebellion from Alderaan to someone who is willing to kill to defeat the Empire.
So how does the radio plate dramatize that shift?
Well, it shows her moral outrage at the Empire's practices long before the film even starts. Then, in a pivotal scene, she confronts an Imperial Lord named Tian. She wrestles him over a blaster, and it discharges and kills him.
Wow.
She admits she hadn't meant for the blaster to hit him, but the core decision to fight and risk taking a life is made. She is transformed. The TRD even includes a detailed portrayal of her torture by Vader, which the film only implied, and shows her persistence even while she's screaming in pain.
So the radio play doesn't just expand the story. It deepens the character's internal logic for becoming this stalwart rebel.
Exactly. Tarkin is shown expressing disbelief that this slip of a girl could defy Vader. But the TRD provides the answer. Her clarity of purpose, her ethical belief that violent resistance is necessary, transforms her into a stalwart rebel ready to die or even kill. She moves from using political privilege to being an active warrior.
Speaking of Leia, let's talk about the franchise's often complicated history with gender politics. Despite Leia's strength, the sources suggest the franchise often struggled with representation, especially in marketing and the old expanded universe.
Yeah, Leia is consistently described as the first feminist action hero of her generation, and that's a reading that Carrie Fisher herself encouraged. But the franchise's engagement with gender has always been ambiguous. It's struggled to move beyond the idea of having just one single strong female character.
And you can see that ambiguity really clearly in the marketing itself.
Historically, the franchise has been marketed as being for boys, yet sometimes for girls. Critics point out that when female merchandise does appear, it often functions as what they call a heterosexist attempt to hail post-feminist consumer subjects.
Okay, hold on. Let's unpack that jargon. Post-feminist consumer subjects. Are you saying they only make merchandise for women when they think those women will buy it ironically, or maybe for their daughters, instead of just accepting that adult women have been fans for decades?
That's pretty close to the heart of it. It's about segregation and late-stage recognition. The idea is that the core product is for boys, and the female-focused products are a segregated afterthought, often leaning into stereotypical ideas of femininity or romantic stories.
It assumes female fandom is a niche.
Right, a niche that needs to be marketed to specifically, rather than just acknowledging the decades of pre-existing female fans who bought the core product anyway.
And some of the explicit attempts to create feminist narratives in the expanded universe, they just failed spectacularly.
They did. The 1995 novel, The Courtship of Princess Leia, is a prime example. The author wanted to feature a strongly feminist society where women were in control, so he introduced these matriarchal societies. But the novel was heavily criticized for failing basic feminist expectations.
How did it fail so badly if it was trying to do the right thing?
Well, despite the matriarchal settings, Luke, Han, and another male character, Isolder, were still the true heroes of the plot. And most controversially, to solve a romantic dilemma, the novel valorized Han's literal abduction and subsequent seduction of Leia.
Oh, that's not good.
No. That narrative choice perpetuated the dangerous myth that women have to be coerced into sexual consent, which completely undermined any positive feminist message the novel was trying to convey. Ultimately, the sources argue that fans are the ones who make Star Wars feminist through fanish play and their own interpretations that focus on Leia's persistence in a patriarchal society, despite the franchise's often confusing official messaging.
The sale to Disney in 2012, it functioned as this critical moment of epistemic break. Our whole relationship to Star Wars as a system of knowledge, it fundamentally changed overnight because the canon structure was just reset.
Right. Before, everything slowed from the mythic authority of George Lucas and the 6 core films. Post-Disney, The process of deciding what's canon is way more complex. It involves the Lucasfilm story group, competing texts, multiple authors.
And the first major test of this new shared reality was the anthology film experiment, Rogue One.
Yeah, Rogue One was so highly anticipated precisely because it was the first non-saga film. It forced fans and creators to ask, what formal elements actually define a Star Wars film?
Formerly, Rogue One tried really hard to be different. It lacked the opening fanfare and the famous opening crawl.
Favored a cold open. It rejected Lucas's signature scene wipes, using regular cuts instead. And it introduced that non-diegetic on-screen text to identify planets, which felt more like a military thrillers than a space opera.
And yet at the same time, it aggressively tied itself to the past. It practically sutured itself right onto A New Hope.
It's a total formalistic tightrope walk. Its entire plot comes from the very first line of the original 1977 opening crawl, and the movie ends mere minutes before A New Hope begins. It aggressively used nostalgia.
The cameos.
It even used previously unseen A New Hope footage for X-Wing pilots, and had those intrusive cameos like R2-D2 and C-3PO. It had to be different enough to justify the anthology idea, but familiar enough to satisfy the demands of the IP farm.
And this new shared authorial structure created a really contested narrative environment, which was perfectly exemplified by the extensive reshoots for Rogue One.
The initial director's vision was clearly not what the corporate structure thought was palatable. Production staff even referred to their experimental period of shooting new material as doing loads of random shit during an indie hour.
And that kind of story of a major blockbuster nearly being a disaster that had to be salvaged, that's a huge break from the mythic singular creation story that Lucas had cultivated for decades.
It's a massive shift. The Disney PR machine actually focused on explaining how the film was saved.
Isn't that counterproductive?
It's a PR paradox. By detailing all the reshoots and the alternative endings, they were basically inviting fans to remix and misremember the film. This strategy created many more than just one Rogue One. It implies that no single faction, not the director, not even the story group, has definitive, unassailable authority over the final cut.
That transparency undermines the idea of inspired genius.
But it reinforces the idea of the franchise as a collaboratively managed commercial product.
This vast, expanding story world that requires constant intervention and explanation leads us to this critical concept of hyperdiegesis. How does that apply to Star Wars?
Hyperdiegesis is the creation of a vast, detailed narrative space, like the Star Wars galaxy, where you only ever see a small fraction of it, but the whole thing operates according to a deep internal logic.
And the franchise keeps renewing itself by exploring what the sources call the mystery of outside spaces.
These outside spaces are essentially the frontier, the areas beyond the galactic map where the internal rules may not apply.
Like wild space, or the unknown regions.
Exactly. Or the original extended universe's Yuuzhan galaxy. These spaces introduce external, non-understood threats, like the Sith Empire or Grand Admiral Thrawn, that force the known galaxy to fundamentally change. This sets up the hyperdiegetic cycle. Outside spaces are brought into the main narrative, which alters its internal logic and sets up the next conflict. It's how the franchise refreshes its story engine.
But the sources also warn that this cycle is often founded on a pretty troubling colonial mythos. Can you elaborate on the ethical challenge there?
That's the critical ethical component. The regeneration of the franchise is often rooted in a politics of fear and a fear of outsiders. The portrayal of outside spaces creates these excluded others who are already monstrous threats. The outsider is the invasion.
And the deep lore actually explores this critically.
It does, specifically in the Knights of the Old Republic 2X game. The Jedi Masters exiled the player character because she was transformed by her experience on the frontier. The Jedi feared her presence would force a similar, destabilizing transformation on them. It demonstrates a xenophobia that ultimately leads to their isolationism and defeat.
So if the Jedi feared the frontier, how is the Disney era managing that fear of the unknown? Are they just repeating the same colonial cycle?
Well, that's the challenge the new canon is facing, especially with characters like Grand Admiral Thrawn, whose origin is tied directly to the unknown regions, and in shows like Ahsoka. The narrative often focuses on the urgency of containing or conquering threats from beyond the established map.
So the true challenge is to embrace the unknown.
The challenge is to embrace the unknown and the strange, the characters, the ethics, the technology, without resorting to that typical colonial mythos of violence or rigid control. The franchise can only truly grow if it goes far enough outside the familiar conventions and integrates the unknown without just destroying it.
That's a fascinating layer to put on top of what is often just considered a simple blockbuster series. It really highlights the complex ethical frameworks that are underlying the spectacle.
So we've covered the staggering commercial bet of Stranger Things, the ruthless data logic of film profitability, and the complex, constantly evolving ecosystem of Star Wars. What does this all mean for the modern creative landscape?
I think it reveals that successful, enduring entertainment, whether it's a profitable, disposable horror film, a high-quality streaming drama, or a vast, multi-generational IP, it thrives on this delicate, often contradictory balance.
You need the creative vision of the author or the team, combined with ruthless business models focused on maximizing IP value.
All while maintaining continuous, enthusiastic audience and fan engagement.
And this brings us right back to Shawn Levy. He is the quintessential modern maker. He understands the art, but he equally understands the commercial demands and the hyper-diegetic pressures of modern IP.
His success across all these genres, from a high-risk show like Stranger Things to massive film franchises like Deadpool and Wolverine and Free Guy, it exemplifies a director who manages to deliver that universally enjoyable cinema within these really complex, highly commercial structures.
He navigates the chaos of that wily coyote business model perfectly.
And if the Star Wars discussion revealed anything, it's that this epic family saga remains just steeped in history, constantly looking back while trying to adapt to new periods and new challenges.
The story of the Skywalker family is the gravitational center of the entire franchise. It progresses by handing its inheritance down to a new generation, but it remained fundamentally bound to that bloodline and that history.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought, one that really tests the true adaptability of the Star Wars universe and its future under this Disney IP farm model.
We've seen that both Rogue One and the sequel trilogy relied heavily on cameos and nostalgia for the original trilogy characters and bloodlines. The next critical test for truly branching out will be future anthology films, like the Han Solo story.
If that film successfully excludes all references to the Skywalker family entirely, which is a massive risk considering the immense popularity of the original characters, it would set a crucial, essential precedent.
It would prove that the franchise can achieve new life and new success without being perpetually bound to the core bloodline, thereby unlocking a truly infinite narrative universe, rather than always being trapped in that hyperdiegetic cycle of just looking back.